Undercover CEO sees a waiter throw out an elderly man, stops cold before teaching him a lesson. Under the morning sunlight filtering through spotless glass windows, Bolera's table stood proud like a gem in the heart of the bustling financial district. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the high ceiling, and every leather-upholstered table and chair was meticulously arranged down to the last corner. This wasn't just a restaurant, it was a symbol of exclusivity, a place where the wealthy, famous business moguls and movie stars gathered to indulge in meals that weren't just outrageously expensive, but served with reverence as if they belonged to society's uppermost echelon. Yet, beneath that glittering facade, a silent undercurrent was beginning to stir. A new announcement had just been issued that morning. From now on, every bill at Bolera's table will automatically include a 20% mandatory tip, no exceptions. In the man office behind the heavy wooden doors, Marta Donavantha, sharp but cold-hearted general manager, stood before the staff, her voice cutting through the air like a razor. This is an improvement to ensure fairness for our service team. But remember, we don't just serve meals, we sell experiences. And not everyone deserves that. At the same time, somewhere quieter in the city, Michael Cartertha, legendary founder who built Bolera's from a small bistro into a grand culinary empire, stood silently before an old, worn mirror. Now 50 years old, he had quietly withdrawn from the spotlight, living fully by the values he had once built the company upon. But as reports of declining service quality and fading compassion crossed his desk, Michael knew it was time to return. Not in an expensive suit or with the imposing presence of the undercover CEO, but as an old, weary man dressed in worn-out clothes, faded shoes, and eyes filled with quiet compassion. This return wasn't to grand commands. It was to sit silently, to listen, and to see for himself. Bolera's table still remained up where every guest, whether wealthy or humble, was served with pure and genuine respect. And so, under the soft morning light, an old man with calloused hands quietly pushed open the door to Bolera's table, beginning a journey that no one, not even those behind the restaurant's opulent facade, could have foreseen. Only this time, he wasn't seeking perfection, but simply searching for the humble, simple values that had once made this place glorious. Beneath the glittering chandeliers of Bolera's table, lunch hour reached its peak. Glasses clinked with elegance. Laughter from Howard business figures echoed through the hall. Corner, behind a grand marble column, an old man sat quietly at a humble table, his worn sweater over thin shoulders. Graham Easton, the very founder of Bolera's, now long retired, was, to the world, just a poor old man. He carried no fame, authority, only a single, heavy question in his heart. Did Bolera's remain the place he had once been so proud of? Kyle Dawson, the notoriously arrogant server, rolled his eyes as he noticed the elderly man stepping into his service area. Ah, here we go again. Soup and tap water. Classic customer, Kyle muttered under his breath, glancing at the old man's humble appearance. Approaching with a half-hearted smirk, Kyle gave a lazy, insincere greeting. Welcome to Bolera's table. Today we're featuring our signature seared scallops paired with a fine vintage wine. What will you be having? Graham looked up, his eyes gentle but seasoned with the wisdom of a lifetime. Just a bowl of soup and some water, thank you. For a split second, Kyle's forced smile disappeared. His eyes flashed with open contempt. Right, just soup and water. Got it. As Kyle didn't bother hiding his irritation, muttering loudly enough heard, "What a waste of time." When it was time to settle the bill, Graham opened his old, worn wallet. Each crumpled bill was carefully counted, but then he paused. The total was higher than he had calculated. At the very bottom of the receipt, in the tiniest printed line, the cold, polished new policy stared back. Mandatory 20% service charge, no exceptions. Graham sighed quietly, his eyes dimming. Mr. Kyle, I'm afraid I don't have enough to cover this. I wasn't aware of the new policy. Kyle, standing squarely in the middle of the grand dining room, deliberately raised his voice for everyone to hear. Didn't know? This isn't some charity soup kitchen, old man. A few smug chuckles rippled through the room as Kyle sneered openly. The old man stood still, his gaze drifting up toward the sparkling crystal glasses, overhead symbols of a place that once stood for dignity and pride. With a dismissive wave, Kyle sneered. Out you go. Next time you're craving free soup, try the church down the road. With that, Graham pushed toward the door. The heavy glass doors of Bolera's table closed behind him with a cold, final thud. But this time, the old man didn't quietly walk. Standing right there on the sidewalk, harsh afternoon light, he pulled out an old phone from his coat pocket. His hands, usually trembling from age, were now steady and firm. It was time. Gerald, prepare an emergency board meeting. This afternoon, Bolares is about to face a major storm. Graham's eyes gleamed with unwavering determination. The game had officially begun, but Graham didn't board meeting to act. That very afternoon, he returned to Bolares this time, not as the frail old man in worn clothes, but quietly into the executive control room. This was the room housing the state-of-the-art surveillance system installed under the final executive decision he made before stepping down years ago. The wall of LED screens lit up brightly, displaying every corner of the restaurant in crisp, clear detail, capturing even the smallest gestures. Graham sat in silence, carefully rewinding the footage to review the exact moments he was humiliated earlier that day. But this time, he wasn't just watching his own experience. He widened his view to uncover what had been hidden behind all that glittering luxury. And then, the naked truth began to reveal itself. Scene 1. In office, early morning. Ryan Cole, operations director, leaned back comfortably in a leather chair, his tone disturbingly casual, yet cold as ice. We need to maximize revenue for every single. Understood? Anyone who looks poor, push them to the back corners. Save the prime view tables for the VIPs. Don't hesitate to throw in a few complimentary wines. They love that feeling of exclusivity. A junior manager snickered. And those soft-hearted fools like Emma, always fussing about whether the customers are happy, I've already shuffled them all off to handle the tables. Scene 2. Service area. Peak hours. Kyle adjusted his tie and whispered to a colleague. His eyes scanned the crowd like a hawk. Look at that designer ropes on the wrist. VIP table 3. Emma's more suited for water to the penny pinchers. At a nearby corner, Emma struggled to explain to an elderly customer about the new mandatory service charge on his. Though her voice remained patient, the exhausted eyes told the real story. She signed to the low-potential areas where guests eyed their bills and hesitated before even leaving a tip. That evening, Graham sat alone in his old office, the scent of aged leather lingering from the chair he'd occupied for over 2 decades. In front of him lay a mountain of memos, suspicious payroll reports, and a flood of internal emails he had quietly gathered. And with every piece of evidence, a painful truth began to emerge. This wasn't just about a mandatory tip policy. It was an entire system of classifying people, something Bolares had never stood for in its founding philosophy. But buried deep within that pile of documents, Graham found something he didn't expect, a seed of rebellion. Brief, discreet email. Emma had sent a message to a small group of younger. We may be small, but if we stand together, maybe, just maybe, we can change this. Graham's eyes lit up. The storm wasn't coming. It had already begun. We can't go on forever. If anyone's ready, Friday night, meet after the shift at the old cafe. Sometimes, all it takes is one brave enough to start, and the rest will find their courage. Graham clenched the note in his hand. He knew the time for real change was drawing near, and this time, people as small and seemingly powerless as Emma wouldn't have to stand alone. That night, a sudden summer rain poured down, each raindrop tapping gently against the glass ceiling of the top floor office. Graham sat alone, poring over the final damning pieces of evidence. Outside, the city was lost in darkness, but on the giant surveillance screens before him, every frame played out with chilling clarity. Camera footage, lunchtime, VIP, management lounge. In the luxurious, wood-paneled room, Ryan Cole sat sprawled in a plush leather chair, expensive suit immaculate, one leg crossed over the other, swirling a glass of cognac. His voice echoed coldly through the room's microphones, and they still believe this tip policy is for their own welfare. Ryan burst out laughing, the sound sharp and filled with contempt. With every extra dollar the customers leave, our little employee adjustment fund grows fatter. Just this month, I've already skimmed an extra 50 grand into off-the-books expenses. 3 months, and I'll have enough to retire and buy that lakeside villa. And the old has no clue. There were snickers from the room. One assistant manager chimed in, Mr. Easton, he's old and out of touch. As long as we keep the front shiny and the rich folks happy, who cares? Graham leaned back deeply into his chair. He remembered every promise he made to Isabella, his late wife, that Bolares' table would never become a playground for the arrogant and wealthy, a place where human dignity was measured by the weight of a wallet. But now, that proud institution was rotting from the inside out, and he himself had handed the keys to the foxes guarding the henhouse. The next day, secret meeting at the old cafe, suburban district, a small cafe, walls lined with rough brick and warm yellow lights, glowing faintly, not a trace of the cold, showy world of Bolares. Emma arrived early. Her hands still bore the red marks from the rubber ties. She sat tucked into a quiet corner, eyes darting nervous toward the door every few moments. And then, quietly, the first wife slipped in. Brianthe, young chef, always pushed into the prep shifts despite his undeniable skills. Lenath cleaner who regularly found her hours cut without notice. Emma stood up, her voice shaky but resolute. I don't know any of you are willing to keep enduring this, but I can't anymore. We are not machines to make money for them. If no one stands up, Bolera's will become nothing more than a place where people are sorted like merchandise. There was the soft glass on a saucer. Brian let out a faint laugh, though his expression was heavy with bitterness. Emma, we know, but who has the courage to stand against them? They have power, the entire behind them. Emma clenched her fists tightly. We don't need to shout. We just need to stand tall when we show up to work, never let them look down on us. And if there's someone strong enough to carry our... She hadn't finished her sentence when the cafe door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway beneath the rain-soaked awning. His worn coat hung heavy on his shoulders, his face hidden in the shadows, but his eyes gleamed like twin flames cutting through the night. It was Graham. No one in the cafe recognized him, not the founder, the chairman whose portrait still hung high in Bolera's grand halls. Graham walked quietly to the table and placed a thick file on it. His voice, deep and calm, held the quiet weight of authority. You are not alone, and it's time we take Bolera back to where it belongs, starting from the very boardroom they think is untouchable. Eyes met across the room, and for the first time in many months, there was real hope. And that was the beginning of a reckoning no one had ever dared to dream. That day, the board had never been so crowded. The glow from the grand crystal chandeliers cast down on tense faces. Kyle leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a nervous glint in his eye despite the cocky smirk tugging at his lips. Marta Donovan sat rigid at the head of the table, perfectly composed, though her hands gripped each other tightly, nails digging into her palms. The doors swung open with a heavy thud. Every head turned. Graham, the man they all believed had long faded into the background, walked in with a presence that age had failed to dim. But this time, he didn't wear the weary look of a retired founder. He wore a tailored gray suit, his eyes cold and sharp, cutting across the room like a blade. He didn't sit. He stood tall in the center of the room, like a judge ready to deliver a final verdict. Graham's voice rose, deliberate, heavy as a bronze bell tolling across the hall. Bolera's table, it's a place where every honor-rich or poor, dressed in a fine suit or a worn sweater, was welcome with respect. But it seems you've all forgotten that. Graham gestured to his assistant to activate the large screen at the back of the room. The room fell completely silent as the screen lit up, and every sound echoed with stunning clarity. A clip of Kyle coldly refusing a glass of water to an elderly woman because she didn't order a main course. Martha Donovan's Itsu voice rang out. Remember, anyone who doesn't look like money, push them to the corner tables. Save the good seats for people who can spend properly. And then, the harshest footage yet, Kyle aggressively drew elderly guest toward the door, spitting out his cutting words like a knife through the air. This isn't a charity soup kitchen. The silence was suffocating. Kyle's eyes were vacant, his lips trembling, unable to form a single word. Marta sat rigidly, desperately trying to maintain, but the glass of water in front of her quivered with the shaking of her clenched hands. Graham walked toward them slowly, every step sounding like a tolling bell in the quiet chamber. To justify this, no one spoke. And that silence was the loudest confession of all. Graham paused, his voice lowering but resonating powerfully across the room. Bolera's table was not built to be a stage for arrogance. And today, I'm taking it back. He turned his eyes directly to Kyle. Kyle Dawson, you are terminated immediately. From this moment, the doors of Bolera's will never open again for those who lack compassion. Kyle turned pale, his face drained of security approached quietly. There was no need for further instructions. Graham turned to Marta, his heavy with disappointment rather than anger. Marta Donovan, in your position of leadership, you didn't just turn a blind eye, you encouraged this toxic culture. You are suspended from duty. Your future at this company will be reconsidered after you learn what it truly means to be a leader. Finally, Graham's expression softened as he turned toward Emma, who stood frozen in shock, her eyes glistening with emotion. Emma Bennett, through these turbulent months, you held on to kindness and integrity. I hereby appoint you as floor manager, starting today. And I believe, under your leadership, the true values of Bolera's table will be restored. And the applause echoed through the room, and for the first time, it wasn't for a sales report or a target exceeded, but because justice had finally been served. Graham turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind a space that felt as if it had just been cleansed. From that very moment, Bolera's table was no longer a place where people bowed heads before opulence, but a place where they stood tall and reclaimed their true worth. Graham walked slowly toward the large, his gaze pausing on every face in the room. I have observed each of you, here in this very space. No need for cards, no grandins, just by how you treated someone you believed had no worth. Oh, With a gentle press of a button, the screen switched series of silent yet heartbreaking clips. A scene where Kyle waved off a young woman carrying her child, dismissively saying, "The good seats are reserved for people who know how to spend money." An elderly man silently leaving, not even offered a glass of water on a scorching summer day. And most painfully, a recording of Marta Donovan whispering on the phone, "I don't manage a restaurant. I manage a money printing machine." Humanity? That's just something we put in the annual report. The air grew thick. Kyle trembled, his legs instinctively stepping back as if for an escape. Marta had gone pale, biting her lip, struggling to remain composed as her shoulders visibly shook. Graham sighed, his eyes softening, but his voice rising in authority. "Have you ever asked yourselves, is a chair valuable because of who sits on it, or because of how a person humbly invites another to sit?" He turned directly toward Kyle. "You, Kyle Dawson. As the founder, I hereby terminate your employment effective immediately. But don't think that's the harshest punishment. The harshest is that for the rest of your life, you'll have to live with the question, when I had the chance to be a decent human being, why choose to be small and petty instead?" Graham waved his hand, signaling the security guards. Kyle slumped, his face blank with shock as two guards gently escorted him out. All eyes followed him. No one uttered a word. Graham turned to Marta, who could barely stand, gripping the edge of the table for support. "Marta Donovan, indifference is sometimes crueler than outright disdain. I once trusted you. Now, you have a choice. Stay and relearn how to lead with true respect for people. Or leave, taking with you pride and arrogance you've so nurtured." Graham paused for a moment, his voice slow but razor sharp. "You are temporarily suspended, and as for whether you deserve to return, I will be the judge of that." E6, a soft murmur rippled through the room, but Graham paid it no mind. His eyes scanned the crowd at Emma, the young woman with eyes glistening from overwhelming emotion. "Emma Bennett," he began in a deep, warm tone, "when other heads before power, you held yours high and preserved the most precious humanity in this place. Starting today, you are officially the floor manager. But not as I'm granting it to you, but because you've earned it through your resilience and kindness." Emma stood motionless. In that moment, all the hardship, the long days spent standing in the shadows, all the tears swelled back, seemed to melt away. She straightened up, her eyes sparkling through the tears. "Thank you, Mr. Easton. Won't let you down." Graham smiled a rare smile, but one filled with deep serenity. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a space freshly cleansed by justice, compassion, and the bitter lesson. Outside, the late afternoon sun streamed through the glass windows, shimmering like a promise of a new beginning. 3 days after the upheaval, the table reopened. But this time, the light shining through the windows wasn't just the brilliance of the city outside, it was the light of a renewed spirit and deeply human. The sign at the entrance was quietly replaced with a small plaque, bearing a simple line, "We don't look at what's in your wallet. We look at the smile on your face." On that very first morning, Graham Easton calm but resolute announced the complete abolition of the forced tipping policy. "Dignity should never be measured by the numbers printed on a bill," he declared, his voice steady and decisive. "From today on, all rewards will come only from genuine smiles of satisfaction, not high receipts." The meeting room fell silent. Then suddenly a single pair of hands began to clap. It came from those who had long been pushed into the darkest corners of the restaurant. One, they stood up, their hands coming together softly in the sound of liberation. Immediately afterward, Graham announced a complete restructuring of the management system. Marta Donovan, who once proudly stood at the top, was officially reassigned as an assistant supervisor at a small sub where she would have to learn again how to hear every sigh of those she had once dismissed. To restore the true spirit of hospitality, 2 long-forgotten names were called out amidst overwhelming joy. Catherine Martinez, former head of service who once left because she refused to accept the discriminatory policies, returned, entrusted with the responsibility of retraining the entire service team. James Chin, the legendary head chef known for his philosophy, "Cuisine is meant to connect people, not divide them by class," also returned, leading the kitchen with pure-hearted dedication. That same afternoon, a scene never before witnessed at Bolera's table took place. A man in dirty, worn work clothes walked in, his eyes nervously scanning the pristine white tablecloths. But unlike the judgmental glances of the past, today he was greeted by Emma Bennett, now floor manager, dressed in an elegant but still carrying the same warm smile she had when she stood in the farthest corner of the room. "Welcome, sir. Would you prefer a seat by the window or something quieter in the garden area?" Emma asked, her eyes sparkling, treating this man as though he were the most honored guest she had ever served. From nearby, Catherine quietly observed the scene, giving a subtle nod to Graham, who sat in the corner of the restaurant, silently witnessing the result of a transformation that had not only changed people, but touched the very soul of Bolera's table. From that moment on, people knew Bolera's table was no longer just a place for an expensive dinner. It had become a place to rediscover kindness, compassion, and the feeling of being truly valued no matter who you were, whether dressed in designer suits or simple, worn clothes. That late afternoon, as the golden sunset filtered through the white silk curtains of Bolera's table, a surprising group of guests appeared at the main entrance. They weren't the usual gentlemen in perfectly tailored suits, nor the elegantly dressed ladies adorned in expensive jewelry. They were ordinary people, construction workers with calloused hands, a young mother cradling her child, and an elderly man on a cane, his face weathered by the sun, but his eyes still kind. No one spoke it aloud, but in their hearts, they all wondered, is there really a place for us here? Emma, dressed in a pale blue suit, the color of hope and new beginnings, walked straight to the door. Without any grand invitation, she simply smiled and said, "Today, Bolera's is for everyone. Please come in." The old man tightened his grip on his cane, his lips trembling to hold back rising emotion. For how long had such grand doors become walls that kept people like him out? Inside the restaurant, time seemed to slow. The wealthiers, those who usually sat near the grand windows, turned to look. But instead of disdainful glances, today they found nothing but sincere smiles from the staff people who had learned, through painful lessons, the true value of humanity. In the kitchen, James Chin watched the scene through the glass window, eyes shining with quiet pride. He signaled his team to prepare a special dish, not the most expensive one, but the one with flavors that could make anyone, rich or poor, feel truly cherished. The compassion, the name that Catherine Martinez softly uttered when she found the old menu again. At that very moment, Graham Easton quietly entered through the side entrance. He didn't carry the imposing air of a founder, but walked in simply, like any other guest. Yet this time, he didn't come to test anyone's hearth, came to witness with his own eyes whether the seeds he had sown over decades had truly begun to bloom. Miguel, the young man who once only dreamed of standing at the reception desk, now officially in a position of welcoming guests. He stood tall, his eyes shining as he spoke. "Welcome, Mr. Easton. Would you like to try the soup everyone's been talking about today?" Graham smiled a rare smile. Not the smile of financial success, but the smile of a master craftsman witnessing his creation being cherished and honored by the world. At that same moment, in the far left corner, Emma bent down gently to listen, as the elderly gentleman with the cane slowly shared an old memory how the last time he dared to step into this place was 10 years ago, celebrating his wedding anniversary with his late wife. And that was also the last time he had felt truly valued in such a luxurious place. Emma softly took his frail hand and whispered, "Today, sir, you're creating a new memory, and we are honored to be a part of it." Outside, the sunset slowly descended, but within Bolera's table, the light from smiles and sincere eyes shone as if it had never dimmed. That night, Bolera's table didn't just glow under the grand crystal chandelier, it radiated with a kind of light, the light of understanding and human kindness. In the hushed, respect space, Graham Easton, the founder, slowly took his place in the center of the hall. His silver hair caught the glow of the lights, but his voice rang clear and deep, reaching straight into the hearts gathered there. "All these years building Bolera's, I once thought the most important things were reputation and recognition. But then, in this very room one day, I walked in wearing worn-out shoes, carrying a wallet with only a few crumpled bills. And that day, I realized what we're losing wasn't just numbers on a financial report." He cast his eyes across the hall where those who once stood quietly in the shadows now stood proudly beside the most elegant tables. Emma stood there, her eyes shining with newfound hope. Miguel, the young man, smiled as he caught the founder's gaze. "You cannot measure a person's worth by the suit they wear or the title they hold." Graham paused for a moment, letting the words and ripple through every corner of the room. "True value is when those who stand lowest dare to raise their heads high, and those at the very top know how to bow down and listen." In that moment, Bolera's table was no longer just a restaurant. It became a symbol, a place where every boundary dissolved, where dignity was reignited, and where even the most ordinary found their rightful place. Final words echoed through the hall. Graham Easton slowly walked out of the room. The doors gently closed behind him, leaving a single thought lingering in the hearts of everyone who remained. Some doors only open when we're willing to step down, and some values can only be rediscovered when we're brave enough to pick them up from those places.